The movie opens with a very chaotic scene. There are crows cawing in the sky while chilly morning winds blow from one direction to the other. Just then, an ambulance is seen rushing to the hospital. As the vehicle reaches the hospital, a whole mob of people start surrounding it. The media and cops seem to be involved in this incident as well. At that moment, a brutally injured man is brought out of the ambulance. He's immediately rushed to the operation theater, but it appears as though he has no intention to stay alive anymore. The man, whose name is Kundan, had been beaten so badly that half of his ribs are now broken, and his skull is completely fractured. The scene now shifts to a rather lively community in Benares where this whole story first began. Small children run around the streets while worshipping the great Lord Shiva. They chant hymns and prayers and have fun. Amongst them is Kundan, who's just a little boy. He, along with his friends, approach every single house in the community to collect donations for the upcoming Dussehra festival. It turns out that Kundan is the only son of Tamil Hindu Brahmin parents who settled in Benares years ago. Moving forward, the young boy soon reaches his teacher's house, where he takes notice of a gorgeous little girl. The girl, whose name is Zoya, appears to be praying. She belongs to an Orthodox Muslim family and respects her religion more than anything. However, as soon as Kundan sees her, he immediately falls in love with her. Despite the fact that he belongs to a family of Hindu priests, Kundan can't help but fall utterly in love with Zoya. He hurriedly runs towards the holy river and bathes in it. While doing so, he chants God's name and prays for Zoya to become his wife someday. Soon, years pass by and both Kundan and Zoya grow up to become young teenagers. However, even after all this time, Kundan still hasn't stopped pursuing Zoya. He simply follows her everywhere and admires her from afar. His two best friends, Murari and Bindia, also tag along with him wherever he goes. Together, the three of them watch Zoya performing at dance competitions, hanging out with her friends and also going to the mosque. Shortly after, the Festival of Colors, known as Holi, arrives. During the celebration, Kundan seems to be enjoying himself with Murari and Bindia. At that moment, Zoya walks towards him and showers him with colors. For the first time in years, Zoya had actually acknowledged Kundan. This makes the latter jump with joy. He starts dancing in excitement while Zoya just giggles. One day, Kundan finally musters up all his courage and grabs Zoya's hand. He then confesses his undying love for her. However, Zoya just reprimands him for his behavior and slaps him. She proceeds to walk away, but that's when Kundan asks her for her name. Giggling, Zoya replies that she'll only tell him her name when he comes to get slapped again the next day. Blindly in love, Kundan just starts dancing because now he'll have the chance to get closer to her, even if that means getting slapped every single day. The story then continues with Kundan getting hit by Zoya every single day. 2 whole weeks pass by, but the boy never gives up. Finally, on the 15th day, Zoya slaps him for the very last time and asks him to meet her the next day. At that moment, Kundan asks Zoya for her name and the latter gives him the answer. In turn, Zoya asks him for his name as well, only for Kundan to lie and say that his name is actually Rizwan. This is because he knows that she'd never accept him if she finds out the truth. The following day, Kundan gets ready to meet Zoya. Meanwhile, Bindia, who's been in love with him ever since they were kids, tries to flirt with him. However, Kundan just dismisses her as he considers her to be nothing more than his best friend. This breaks Bindia's heart because she knows that she'll never be able to compete with Zoya. On the other hand, Kundan finally reaches an old fort where he starts practicing his proposal nervously. Zoya arrives at that very moment and the two awkwardly talk for a while. Eventually, Kundan pulls her close and confesses all his feelings for her. That's when the two start to get closer and closer. Just as the two embrace one another, Zoya comes to find out that Kundan is actually from a Hindu family. This angers her, so she slaps him once again and walks away at that instant. She claims that she hates liars and soon disappears out of sight. From that day on, Zoya starts to avoid Kundan on purpose as her family is very orthodox. She knows for sure that her relationship with Kundan would go nowhere. However, the latter isn't ready to accept this fact. He simply continues following her around and even goes as far as to for her. When Zoya sees Kundan covered in blood, she starts panicking and finally confesses that she loves him as well. She then kisses him while crying profusely. Later that day, Zoya's family comes to know about her and Kundan. Furious, her father slaps her and sends her away to Aligarh for further studies. Heartbroken, Zoya goes away to her aunt's house. Meanwhile, Kundan finds out about Zoya moving away and runs after her. He tries to stop her, but it's to no avail. Soon, 8 years pass by and Kundan transforms into a young man. He's still the same mischievous and adventurous soul. While celebrating Holi, Bindia grabs Kundan and confesses her love for him. She wishes to marry him. However, Kundan just pushes her away and says that Zoya is coming back. Hearing this, Bindia just grimaces and slams him to the ground. She then curses both him and Zoya before walking away furiously. On the other hand, Kundan just giggles and starts reminiscing about all the moments he had spent with Zoya. He starts dancing in excitement because the love of his life is coming back. However, when he goes to the train station to receive Zoya, he's devastated to learn that she doesn't even remember him anymore. She just walks past him as if he's some sort of stranger. This event crushes Kundan, but he still doesn't give up. He remains adamant on winning Zoya back. One day, he stands outside Zoya's house and tries to remind her of their childhood. The latter is confused for a while, but soon after, she starts to remember everything. Excited, Zoya runs up to him and hugs him tightly. She then greets him like a friend while Kundan stays mesmerized by her beauty. He ends up thinking that Zoya still has feelings for him. The very next day, Kundan meets Zoya once again and asks her to marry him. Needless to say, Zoya is shocked by the proposal and bluntly denies ever having feelings for him. She claims that it was just childhood infatuation and nothing else. Despite hearing all this, Kundan still doesn't budge. He relentlessly tries to flirt with her. Now more furious than ever, Zoya yells at Kundan for his childish nature and leaves the scene. Later, Kundan goes to Murari and tells him everything. The two then try to figure out ways to further convince Zoya. Meanwhile, Bindia just giggles in excitement and teases Kundan for being so delusional. Moving on, Kundan jumps from one house to another and finally reaches Zoya's place. There, he tries to talk to her. However, that's when Zoya's father, Mr. Hader, walks in and greets Kundan. He then goes on to ask the young boy for some help as they're having an event soon. Thinking that he might get closer to Zoya and her family, Kundan instantly accepts. He immediately starts preparing for the event. However, much to his dismay, Kundan soon learns that the celebration is being held to arrange Zoya's marriage. Apparently, many suitors would be coming to visit her. This devastates Kundan, so he instantly runs to Zoya and yells at her for betraying him. Furious, the latter just criticizes Kundan for his pathetic behavior. When Zoya finds out that she's going to get married soon, she immediately runs to her mother and argues with her. She claims that she doesn't want to get married, which instantly cheers Kundan up. The two then come up with a plan to stop this marriage altogether. The next day, Kundan runs up to Bindia for help. When the latter hears about the plan, she instantly refuses. However, Kundan just drags her and sends her to the hospital where Zoya's suitor happens to work as a doctor. Once there, Bindia starts clinging to the doctor and flirting with him. Murari clicks several pictures of this incident and ends up convincing Zoya's family that her potential husband is in fact a cheater. Shortly after, the marriage is cancelled. Zoya is ecstatic and thanks Kundan for this. To return his favor, Kundan asks Zoya to go on a drive with her. The latter agrees, and so the two go for a long drive. They have lots of fun and chat about their respective lives. After a while, Zoya finally confesses that she's actually in love with the boy. She goes on to tell Kundan that she has fallen for the student council leader of her college. Hearing this, Kundan is devastated. He had thought that the reason behind Zoya refusing for the marriage was because she was actually in love with him. Sadly, it turns out that Zoya is in a relationship with a boy named Akram. Zoya continues on by saying that if she doesn't get married to Akram, then she will take. The scene then shifts to Zoya's college, where she first laid eyes on Akram. As soon as she sees him, she immediately falls in love with him. Luckily for her, the guy also reciprocates her feelings. Zoya is interested in Akram because of his kindness and his willpower to change the world for the better. She's deeply impressed by the way he listens to the voice of the needy and works for them. Not just that, he had also helped Zoya gain her lost confidence. Because of this very reason, Zoya had found her new identity completely connected to Akram. Shortly after, the two become inseparable. When Kundan comes to learn about all this, he becomes furious. He waits for Zoya to finish gushing about Akram and then drives his scooter straight into the lake. Zoya screams out in fear, but the love-struck boy just doesn't care. Eventually, the two dive right into the water, after which Kundan just walks away. Meanwhile, Zoya is stunned to see this side of Kundan. She now becomes extremely annoyed at his obsession and goes back home alone. There, she finds out that her parents have chosen another man for her. Furious, Zoya finally confesses to her whole family that she's in love with Akram. She even goes on to say that she'll only marry him and no one else. On the other hand, Kundan's dreams are now completely shattered. He becomes numb and has absolutely no sense anymore. Out of anger and frustration, once again. The next day, when Murari goes to talk to Kundan, he sees that the latter is completely unconscious. Panicking, he immediately takes Kundan to the hospital, where he luckily gets saved. Just as Kundan is being treated, Zoya's best friend walks up to him. She then tells Kundan that Zoya wishes to speak to him. Hearing this, he hesitantly goes to meet Zoya, where he sees the latter crying. When Zoya sees Kundan, she starts telling him all about her family forcing her to get married. While she's explaining everything, she notices Kundan's bloodied wrists. She starts panicking once again and yells at Kundan for being so pathetic. She begs him to come back to his senses. Frustrated, Zoya then goes on to explain that she's Muslim and he's Hindu. Their relationship would never be accepted by society. After seeing Zoya so anxious, Kundan finally realizes his mistake. He apologizes for being so obsessive and promises Zoya that he'll help her get married to Akram. Later that night, Kundan approaches Mr. Hader and confesses that he was the Hindu boy who Zoya had previously fallen in love with. When Mr. Hader hears this, he is absolutely stunned. He immediately starts ignoring Kundan, but the latter doesn't give up. He begs for forgiveness and eventually explains everything about Akram. Mr. Hader patiently listens to Kundan and ends up realizing that his daughter actually loves a well-educated Muslim man. Seeing that Akram is from a religious Muslim family, Zoya's parents finally accept her relationship. They even start preparing for the wedding. The next day, Zoya excitedly goes to meet Kundan. As soon as she sees him, she hugs him tightly and thanks him for convincing her father about Akram. At that moment, Kundan also grabs Zoya tightly and angrily whispers in her ear that he'll always love her. However, he refuses to follow her around like a dog anymore. Out of frustration and grief, he sternly tells Zoya that he'll also get married to someone else the same day she gets married to Akram. At last, he grits his teeth and promises her that he'll never take her name again. Finally, Kundan walks away, ready to start a new phase of his life. But unbeknownst to him, this love story had just begun its climax. Shortly after, Kundan rushes to Bindiya's house and asks her to marry him. Bindiya, who's unknown to everything that just happened, immediately accepts the proposal. Her happiness has no bounds as she's finally getting married to the love of her life. The wedding preparations begin soon. Zoya is excited because her family is ready to accept Akram. Meanwhile, Bindiya also goes to several temples and thanks God for making her wish come true. However, amongst all this, Kundan is busy preparing for both his and Zoya's wedding. He keeps himself occupied to distract himself from the fact that his life will now never be the same. Everything seems to be going extremely well until the day of the wedding arrives. Kundan completely breaks down, unable to process that Zoya is now gone forever. Just as Murari walks over to console him, he sees a newspaper article. Suddenly, his whole expression changes. He immediately gives the newspaper to Kundan, who's also utterly shocked. Furious, the latter rushes over to Zoya's wedding. There, he announces to everyone that Zoya had lied. It turns out that the person she's getting married to isn't a Muslim man named Akram. Instead, her lover's name is actually Jess. Needless to say, Zoya's family is dumbfounded. They look at the newspaper article in Kundan's hand, which clearly depicts that Zoya's boyfriend is a Hindu man. In reality, Zoya had lied and tricked everyone into believing that Jess was actually Muslim. The two had planned to reveal the truth only after the wedding. As soon as the complete truth is unveiled, the wedding is cancelled. All of Zoya's relatives capture Jess and brutally beat him up. On the other hand, Kundan finds out that Zoya has also both her and Jess are now in a critical condition. Realizing that his anger has ruined everything, Kundan runs to the nearby train station where he ends up locating Jess in a pitiful state. Together, he and Murari immediately rush Jess to the hospital. At that moment, the doctor informs Kundan that Zoya is now in a stable condition. Soon after, Kundan goes to meet Zoya. However, that's when he realizes that amidst the whole chaos, he had forgotten about his own wedding. He and Murari return home right away, only to see that everything is now a complete mess. Bindiya was completely heartbroken and had already returned home with no hopes of marrying him anymore. Furious, Kundan's father beats him up for breaking an innocent girl's heart and then kicks him out of his house. With nowhere to go anymore, Kundan returns back to the hospital where he checks up on Jess. Thankfully, he is now conscious and recovering from his injuries. When Jess sees Kundan waiting for him, he just smiles and says that love is a very dangerous thing. The latter deeply apologizes to him for causing so much damage. However, Jess continues smiling and tells Kundan that it was actually Zoya's idea for him to pretend to be a Muslim so that they could get married. Jess always knew that he shouldn't have agreed to such a disastrous plan, but he simply ignored his brain and followed his heart. This ultimately led him to where he is now. In the end, Jess asserts that he must recover in order to win the election and get a seat in the parliament. Only then would he be able to help the poor and needy. It turns out that Jess had founded a political party called the All India Citizen Party, which mainly focuses on fighting various social parties. Their increasing popularity among the netizens didn't sit right with the opposition party. Because of this, their rivals planned several conspiracies in order to take them down. Despite all this, Jess never gave up. He kept on fighting and winning. Unfortunately, this all came to an end when he fell in love with Zoya and left for Benares as a Muslim man. The once invincible political leader is now bedridden, all because of a love triangle. After hearing this, Kundan feels extremely guilty. He is now adamant on redeeming himself and helping Jess get back on his feet. Shortly after, Jess's parents take him back to their village. In the meantime, Kundan goes to Zoya, who now despises him more than anything. He tries to apologize to her, but the latter doesn't even want to see his face anymore. In order to make things right, Kundan offers to take Zoya to Jess's village. He promises that he'll make sure the two lovers are united once again. That very night, Zoya and Kundan leave for Punjab. The two travel day and night and eventually reach Jess's house. Even though he's heartbroken, Kundan walks up to Jess's residence in order to talk to his parents. However, when he reaches there, he is devastated to learn that Jess has succumbed to his injuries. Kundan had accidentally walked right into Jess's funeral. Seeing this, Kundan feels so guilty that he runs out of the house and throws up violently. Zoya is initially confused to see Kundan's state. Perplexed, she walks inside Jess's house and finds out that he's no more. This completely crushes her. Meanwhile, Kundan finally realizes that his one-sided love for Zoya has resulted in an innocent man's death. Now homeless, he begins visiting various religious places across the country, and volunteering in their activities to atone for his sins. He walks for miles and miles just to get rid of his guilt. On one of these visits, Kundan comes across a man who tells him that there's no forgiveness for murder. He then advises the guilt-ridden man to stop begging for salvation at the banks of a holy river. Hearing this, Kundan realizes that he must do the right thing instead of just running away. Soon after, Kundan calls Murari and asks him about Zoya's whereabouts. However, that's when he comes to find out that Zoya never returned home. Everyone in the community is now convinced that she and Kundan had eloped together. Eventually, Kundan reaches Delhi as he's now on a mission to find Zoya. It turns out that the latter is back at her university, working as the vanguard of Jas's political party. When Zoya spots Kundan looking for her, she becomes enraged and walks away at that very instant. However, Kundan just clings to the back of her political bus and follows her around. He even tries to sneak into her campus room. But halfway through, Kundan gets caught by the other college students. When they ask him who he is, Kundan simply replies that he's a thief. Instead of handing him over to the police, the student body feeds him and asks him why he would do such a thing. Kundan then takes this opportunity to say that he's dirt poor, which has basically forced him to steal. The students feel really bad for him and end up giving him a job at a nearby tea station. The next day, Zoya and her best friend, Rashmi, who also happens to be Jas's sister, decide that ICP should continue on with the elections. They do not want Jas's efforts to go in vain. During the party meeting, Rashmi nominates Zoya as their new leader. Just as they're discussing their plans for the election, Kundan walks in and distributes tea to everyone around. That's when Zoya sees him and gives him a death glare. However, Kundan doesn't even look her in the eye and walks away. Days pass by and the election preparations start with full speed. Zoya and Rashmi take care of everything while Kundan continues bringing them snacks and tidying up after them. Soon enough, he gets close to all the other members of the party. He tries his hardest to get Zoya's attention, but it's to no avail. Eventually, he ends up joining the political party and tags along with them wherever they go. Over time, Kundan becomes really popular with the party due to his simple wit and charm. He helps his team by assisting them in various negotiations, ultimating preventing a lot of bloodshed. Eventually, all the party members get thoroughly impressed when Kundan helps them bring in a lot of citizens to their side. They quickly realize that with Kundan's help, they can easily win the election. Soon enough, AICP becomes really popular and starts to get a lot of media coverage. It appears as though Jas's dream is finally coming true. Over time, Kundan starts protesting and leading the party. He takes AICP to a whole new level. Despite all this, Zoya still holds a grudge that the person who is responsible for Jas's death is now taking his place. In reality, Kundan doesn't care about the party nor the country. All he wants is Zoya's forgiveness. However, it seems as though Zoya would rather want him dead than forgiven. Soon after, AICP starts to become a massive threat to all the other large political parties of the country. This causes the chief minister to get enraged. Seeing them win with such a large amount of votes makes her furious. She is now determined to uproot them altogether. On the other hand, Zoya gets increasingly frustrated with Kundan's newfound popularity. She just can't stand him any longer, so she tries to instigate her party members against him. Zoya tells everyone that Kundan is the one responsible for Jas's death. She even goes as far as to say that he's doing all this to completely take over Jas's existence and identity. Right at that moment, Rashmi stops Zoya and suggests that they continue with Kundan, as he is the best choice for fulfilling Jas's vision. She somehow convinces the party that Kundan is their last hope. Meanwhile, the ruthless chief minister comes to find out all about Zoya and Kundan's dispute. She gets to the bottom of the problem and learns all about their past. She then realizes that she can manipulate this situation for her own benefit. Soon, the chief minister starts to instigate Zoya by saying that she must get her revenge on Kundan. To get back Jas's position, she asks Zoya to let Kundan get injured as he delivers his campaign speech. The latter is completely brainwashed by this plan. Consumed by anger, Zoya immediately agrees and convinces Kundan to go to their upcoming rally, knowing full well that a brutal attack is to occur there. The next few days pass by peacefully while Zoya plans to get Kundan beaten the same way Jas was. She feels guilty at times but soon brushes it off after remembering Jas and his brutal death. Finally, the day of the rally arrives and Kundan gets ready to deliver his speech. Zoya just observes everything quietly, unsure of whether she should continue with the plan or not. Right before Kundan is about to walk out, Zoya gives him Jas's jacket and wishes him all the best. The two then share an emotional moment for a little while. Shortly after, Kundan walks towards the rally with full confidence. He's about to deliver his speech, but that's when a massive explosion occurs. Everything goes berserk from there, and just like the chief minister had desired, Kundan gets hurt badly during the fight. He is immediately sent to the ICU, thus fulfilling Zoya's revenge. On the other hand, Murari, Bindia and Kundan's family come to know about the fight. As soon as they learn that he has been shot, they rush towards the hospital. Meanwhile, Zoya starts to feel the guilt creeping up to her. She just can't stand the sight of herself anymore. She goes to attend a press meet where the chief minister strictly denies having any hand in the blast that hurt Kundan. In order to make things right, Zoya steps forward and reveals that the minister is in fact lying. She clarifies that the plan was plotted by her and the chief minister together. Finally, Zoya expresses that she's prepared to go to prison for this. Later, Zoya comes to find out that Kundan was aware of the plot all along. He had already been informed by the police about the explosion, but even after knowing that he might be killed, he let himself be injured. Shocked, she rushes to the hospital to be with him. On the other hand, Murari and Bindia desperately wait for Kundan to recover. Eventually, they watch him bid his final goodbye. Zoya also reaches at the last moment but quickly realizes that it's too late. In a final voiceover, a dying Kundan wonders about letting go. He says he might have the desire to stay alive again if Zoya called out to him, but then again, everything has become so tiring. In the end, he claims that he would rather let go and rest. He simply doesn't want to fight anymore. The movie finally concludes with Kundan saying that he wants to be born again and again in the same Varanasi, fall in love with a girl like Zoya again, and be lovelorn again in her thoughts.